Can you imagine how difficult it is trying to raise a child while attending classes, taking exams, and getting a college degree? Well, there are more than 5 million college graduates or college undergraduates who are parents on U.S. colleges and universities. But according to a new study, if you are a Black father on one of these campuses, your chances of graduating and succeeding are pretty dismal, especially when compared to that of mothers. The co-author of that study, along with a dad who overcame these obstacles to graduate while parenting, joins me coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
According to a new study out by the Hope Center for College, Community, and Justice at Temple University, higher rates of homelessness and financial instability are the hallmarks of Black fathers in college. Nearly 1 in 4 Black fathers say they contended with homelessness, and barely 11% received any help. 2 in 5 Black fathers say they experienced job loss, pay cuts, and reduced hours. That study also shows Black fathers are dropping out of school at higher rates than any other student-parent group. There are a myriad of reasons for these dismal statistics, but the bottom line is Black fathers pursuing higher education are not getting the support and attention they need, as most college programs focus on mothers. Now, today is International Women's Day, and we salute those mothers who are raising kids while attending college. But today, we're focusing on fathers and asking the experts, what will it take to help dads succeed at parenting and higher education? My first guest is Ali Caccavella. She is a senior specialist at the Hope Center for College, Community, and Justice at Temple University, and she's a co-author of that study on Black fathers. Good morning and welcome, Ali.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for the study. I actually read about it in the Washington Post, and it caught my attention, really intrigued by some of the findings in the story, in the study. But first, I wanted to ask you, what prompted you, the folks at Temple University, the center that you're a part of, to actually conduct this study?
Thanks so much for that question. And the student level data around college students today is really difficult to come by, especially disaggregated by race, ethnicity, and gender. So we at the Hope Center focus on college students' basic needs and mostly the epidemic of basic needs and security that we find in our survey that is the largest of its kind, administered to over 500 institutions across the country at this point and completed by over 500,000 students at this point. And we see, many intersectional identities experiencing basic needs and security, but we wanted to really focus on parenting students and noting that parenting students do tend to be majority students of color. About 51% of all of parenting students are students of color. And we wanted to elevate the particular needs disaggregated by race and ethnicity, which is difficult to find in the higher education landscape.
About how many people actually participated in this study?
So this survey was fielded in the fall of 2020, what we call the ongoing pandemic. So the survey typically is administered to students in the fall semester. And this was a unique just last, fall 2020, after sort of the initial spring of the pandemic hit and wanting to get a lens on students' lived experience during that time. It was completed by nearly 200,000 college students nationwide, and over 32,000 were specifically parenting students. And that means they are providing primary care to a child.
Just generally, Ali, what were the findings from your survey?
So, upsettingly, maybe not surprisingly, we found that parenting students actually face a higher rate of basic needs and security overall than non-parenting students. So overall, there's about 3 in 5 college students today are suffering from lack of adequate nutrition and safe, stable housing. But for parenting students, the numbers were about 70% overall. So from the 60% for non-parenting. We also found that students of color, particularly Asian, Black, and Latinx identifying students, experience extremely high rates of basic needs insecurity, including those with young children. Nearly all, so close to 90%, are facing either food or housing insecurity. We also found that this has ripple effects on children. So when we're talking about parenting students, we must remember we're talking about families and children. And they did indeed indicate high devastating rates of food insecurity for their children. And we also found that Black fathers in particular are struggling quietly. So experiencing extreme basic needs insecurity, including 1 in 4 experiencing homelessness, but not accessing the supports that are available either on campus and or public available benefits, accessing those at about half the rate of mothers.
And what was the most shocking thing that you found in this survey, Ali?
I mean, certainly when we disaggregate the data of lived experience of students by race and ethnicity, it is staggering to see the impacts. We know that the pandemic has exacerbated economic impacts along racial lines. We know that the disparities in COVID recovery and economic impacts are endured greatly by people of color. But to really see the stark numbers and to really see that mostly all parenting students of color are experiencing some form of basic needs insecurity while pursuing a college degree. And in particular, I think that the rate of Black fathers enduring homelessness, and again, when we recall that means also impacts on their children, it's shocking and it's unacceptable, and we need to be elevating and talking about this. So thank you for bringing this to the show today.
I don't know if the survey went this far, but did you look at what was causing, this housing insecurity and food insecurity, particularly with Black fathers?
So, the survey is limited in terms of the lived experience that students have reported. And so we have to be careful. We could, consider 1,000 reasons why this could be the case in the context that we're in, particularly this context of racial trauma continuing to unfold across the country, from HBCUs being systemically targeted by bomb threats, right? With the nation kind of a large percentage considering critical race theory to be propaganda as opposed to actual history. I think we know the stigmas of accessing support are true for all humans and are going to be more difficult for those who've been historically marginalized and systemically marginalized. I think the other piece, parenting students in particular are underaccounted. They're underaccounted and they're underacknowledged across college campuses. Most colleges do not ask their students or indicate whether or not they are parenting. And so they faced higher rates of cost to attend college. Childcare in some cases can be more expensive than tuition itself. Also, we see that Black fathers in particular experienced really heavy economic setbacks as a result of the pandemic, as you noted in your opening, including reduction in hour, loss of pay, and loss of jobs at increased rates. So a lot of compounding factors. Higher education sort of sits at the intersection of so many socioeconomic systems that come to bear.
When I think about myself and my own college experience, I'm thinking of, particularly when I was in law school, there was student housing for families. So you often would see at the graduate school level, parents who had kids actually living with them in student housing. Across undergraduate campuses in this country, is that common to have student housing where families and adults can bring their children?
Unfortunately, that is the exception. And thank you so much for bringing that up, because there are so many actually real systemic policies in place that make it difficult for college enrolled people to succeed and persist, particularly if you're parenting. So many of the housing subsidies, either access to subsidized housing or support for rent or housing payments, are actually ineligible if you are college enrolled. So that becomes a big problem. And affordable housing on college campuses is really difficult to come by for any student. Costs continue to rise, and there is a dearth of affordable housing. And there are a lot of restrictions, very often related to children on campus and families in housing, that continue to also present barriers for parenting students.
So you're saying that these parents, college parents, are caught in the middle because a lot of affordable housing that's available by your county, your state, or the federal government, you're not eligible for if you are enrolled as a student. And a lot of colleges have restriction on their college housing to prevent parents from accessing it.
That's correct.
And so where are these students? Where did you, if you did in your survey, and I know you said it had limitations, but where are these students living if they are enrolled in college, particularly those that have custody of their children?
So majority of college students today are living independently, right? So they're living separate from maybe their parents or families, or they are head of household. So they're, when we did survey our students based on housing security, and where students indicated lack of housing security, that means they're living in temporary housing. They might be, what we call couch surfing. So moving from place to place where they can get safe, for the night or a few days. But there is a crisis of affordable student housing, and it is really falling on the backs of students who are parenting disproportionately.
Is childcare has the same, do parents face the same issues with respect to childcare, where they fall in this gap? Because if you are a parent enrolled in college, are you eligible for some of the childcare subsidies that exist, that are available, again, by your county, your state, or the federal government?
It really depends. And thank you again for raising that question. So the specific campus-based housing program called C Campus is a relatively small but incredibly successful program. So where institutions are able to take that federal funding, and it's limited, and actually implement campus-based childcare. And many of those childcare facilities mostly serve faculty. So there's limited space and long wait lists. The Childcare Development Block Grant is a federal program that has a lot of state authority to interpret and provide access to parenting students, and that can look different based on the region and the state.
So essentially, again, like housing, finding childcare is incredibly difficult for college students who are parents. Let's talk about, what do you do with this data now? Now you have these horrible statistics, particularly as they relate to Black fathers. Where does your university, or where do you want the country to go with respect to this data that's been obtained?
Thank you for asking. So at the Hope Center, the goal is to elevate the data to help make the change and make impact to change the structural systems to better support students. So the brief has multiple recommendations for every level, from federal, state, and institutional interventions to help address. Overall, we're asking, first of all, that institutions account and acknowledge their parenting students. So begin to collect actual data on students' lived experience and also their basic needs. And also that we bring parenting students to the table. So I really am grateful to you and your producers for making sure to center parenting students and their lived experience, because they are diverse and they represent many intersectional identities, as diverse as college students today. And we really need their expertise about their experiences of the systems and where the obstacles are, as they have the insights that are needed to make solutions that'll better support them. So then beyond that, at the federal level, we ask that federal policymakers make emergency aid permanent and increase amounts for parenting students. We know where emergency relief funds, including the child tax credit, emergency grants, and other relief aid, is mostly going to meet basic needs. It's mostly going to pay for rent and put food on the table. We also ask that the pursuit of post-secondary credential be counted as any work requirement for the ongoing work requirements that persist across public benefits programs that we know have, racialized work requirements that need to stop and need to be called out for what they are, and we need to recognize college coursework as work. We also recommend that the Department of Ed work to expand affordable student housing and to be more inclusive of families and parenting students. And there's a lot that we need to do at the individual housing systems levels to provide greater access and affordability for parenting students and all students, frankly. The state level, there's a lot of authority state policymakers can make, including overhauling state financial aid policies that often discriminate against parenting students by requiring that they attend full-time and or that they enroll immediately after high school, which eliminates parents who are taking time off to care for a child or family member. And also similarly to apply coursework as work for programs like TANF, and also help access basic needs on the campus level and, exercise state authority to make those benefits available and accessible.
Yeah, it's really shocking that state and federal authorities don't recognize students who are enrolled in college as meeting the criteria for certain public benefits. You would think they would be incentivized, and the government would be happy to see that parents are going back to school or continuing their education, because we know that folks that graduate from college have higher earning potential, which means they're less likely to be in need of federal or state public assistance down the road. So you would think there would be a lot of support, like, yes, go back to school, get your degree, and we'll subsidize your housing, we'll subsidize your childcare, because we know that there are significant benefits that will accrue to you as a parent, and then by definition, your family. Thank you so much, Ali, for this really insightful study, for not only surveying the students, but making some substantive recommendations. Hopefully this conversation will continue. It'll be elevated, and some of these recommendations will actually be adopted at the federal and state level. Again, thank you for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
Ali talked about centering parenting students. My next guest is Nicole Lewis. She's the CEO of Generation Hope, a nonprofit organization she started to help student parents graduate from college. Nicole herself was a student parent. Nicole is also the author of Pregnant Girl, a story of teen motherhood, college, and creating a better future for young families. Good morning and welcome, Nicole.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. Well, congratulations. Thank you for joining me. Congratulations first on your book. I know it just came out a couple of months ago. I haven't had a chance to pick it up and read it. I'm excited, though, to see the title, and I suspect, is this the story of your own experience?
It is. It's a memoir, so it's a story of my own experience as a student mother. I was a teen mom, got pregnant my senior year of high school, and it really talks about teen pregnancy and kind of the complexities of teen pregnancy, taking into account race and gender and poverty, but also how do we help more teen parents actually make it to the graduation stage in college. The numbers are pretty dismal, and both teen moms and teen fathers. And then it also talks about the organization Generation Hope that I founded in 2010 to really ensure that more young parents and parenting college students actually get that post-secondary credential.
Let's talk about your own experience, Nicole, the challenges that you face. I'm thinking now that, I don't know how old you are, but I imagine, this happened some time ago, obviously. But I feel like we in some ways, we're more enlightened, right? And that there isn't the same stigma associated with being a teen parent as there was some decades ago. Am I wrong about that?
It's really interesting because I get this question a lot. And I think there's two conversations that are kind of connected to this issue. One is student parents and, parenting college students of any age, which Ali did a great job of kind of breaking down the challenges associated with being a student parent. And then there's teen parents and teen pregnancy. And I graduated from college 20 years ago, and I've kind of
I would have been so wrong. I'd have said like 5 years ago, you're like 23 or 24 years old.
Let's go with 5 years ago. Let's go with 5 years ago. But yes, 2003 is when I graduated. And so I've been able to see the evolution of both of these conversations over the last 20 years. And the student parent conversation has definitely progressed. You see the Hope Center doing incredible work on this issue. We have other wonderful partners in the student parent movement, really trying to create a recognition that there are parenting students across the country that are deserving of support. The teen parent conversation and teen pregnancy conversation has not evolved in the same positive way. Yes, we have shows like MTV's 16 and Pregnant and all of those things. We don't have to talk about it in these hushed conversations, but there's still a lot of stigma around being a teen mother, being a teen father, and a sentiment that you're undeserving of resources and supports because of the fact that you had a child young. And that's where we need to see more progress. I'd love to see both of those conversations moving forward at the same pace.
What are some of the unique experiences that you experienced as a teen mom who was on a college campus? Because as you said, you did graduate not only with your undergraduate degree, you also went on to get your master's degree. So obviously you faced some struggles, but you were able to overcome them. What were some of the significant challenges that you did face?
Well, my challenges really began even before I stepped foot on my college campus. I had the big challenge of just getting to campus every day. I was my freshman year. I lived off campus. I went to the College of William and Mary, and I lived in Newport News. My childcare was my daughter's aunt, and that was in Portsmouth, Virginia. So I had a geographical challenge of getting to school every day. I was driving about 150 miles every day, maybe 3 to 4 hours in the car to get to class, get to campus, go home, pick up my daughter, do it all over again.
You said 150 miles a day?
Yes. Yes.
For 4 years, the 4 years that it takes to get
That was my first year.
Okay.
So that was my freshman year. So just transportation was tough. But then, I stepped foot on campus. I was completely alone. I was an anomaly at William and Mary. There was no other kind of parenting student I could turn to and say, hey, how do I do this? They didn't really quite know what to do with me on my first day orientation. So they lumped me in with transfer students. I had to navigate the campus and my college experience really on my own. There were not supports in place for me to be successful. Simple things like finding a room to pump. I had a 3-month-old baby when I started as a freshman at William and Mary, and so just trying to find a place to pump my milk and do basic things like that, but also to find community, to find professors who would understand why I couldn't come to class because I had a sick child. All of those things were incredibly difficult. I was also, as Ali, kind of laid out from the research that she found at the Hope Center, I was every day up against basic needs and security. I was trying to find a way to put a roof over my daughter's head and my head, putting food on the table. Some days I would just eat a granola bar so that she could eat and have what she needed. How to pay for childcare. That was a never ending kind of quest to find affordable childcare, and keeping heat on in the winter, buying books for class and having enough to buy diapers and baby wipes. So every day I was in survival mode, and that was on top of going to a really prestigious college and trying to stay on top of my classwork. So it was incredibly difficult.
I just want to take this moment to just acknowledge what it sounds so overwhelming, but yet you persevered, you overcame those challenges. And I'm sitting here just kind of saddened by it because I know your story is not an anomaly.
Right.
I mean, you are speaking not just for you, Nicole, but probably for so many other women, particularly women of color on college campuses. I'm thinking about one of my best friends from St. Louis who enrolled in Spelman as we were graduating from high school, and she later found out she was pregnant, or maybe she already knew, I can't remember, but in any event, she dropped out.
Yeah.
She left the campus to go back to St. Louis because of the stigma, because the shame, let's just call it what it is.
Yes.
And she did, like you, fortunately finished her undergraduate degree, got a master's degree, and she's, phenomenal, doing fantastic. But I do think about those days and how difficult it was. And I wonder for you, were you even able to talk to people on campus about the fact that you were a mother and what you were going through?
So that was a toss-up. I mean, it was like a 50-50 chance. There were times where I told people that I was a mother. I told professors, for example, and I would have really punitive responses and really negative responses. And then there were times that I disclosed that I was a parent, and I had professors who were really supportive. And it just kind of ran the full gamut. And it was always a chance, a risk to disclose the fact that I was a mother, that I was raising a child. And I think that's the case for a lot of parenting students. You don't feel safe with everybody. You know that you're in an environment on a college campus that is not embracing of you and being a caregiver, and that there are often, unfortunately, negative responses that can backfire on you and impact your ability to do well in a class. And so it can be a toss-up. And I definitely found that to be the case. There were people who were supportive, but then there were other people who were not supportive.
Okay, I just had this thought go through my mind. It's not your story, but I'm thinking of Lisa Ray in Players Club. I'm sorry.
Okay, not my story.
But I'm thinking of her sleep in class, right?
Yes.
Because she had been out all night working. If you've seen the movie, you know what she was doing. She was working at a strip club to put herself through college. And even though that story has so many other, subject matters that we're not talking about today, it really is about a single mom who had a baby, who's trying to finish college, who's trying to better herself, who found herself working in a strip club to make money because that was the only way she thought she could support herself. And I do wonder how many women, particularly on college campuses, resort, maybe now it's online or there are other things that they do that they wouldn't ordinarily do because they do feel this sense of obligation and urgency to support themselves and their children.
Yeah. I mean, and absolutely no judgment, here around a mother doing what she needs to do to provide for her child. What I do know is that we all have this universal, if you're a parent, if you're mothering or fathering, you totally understand this. There's this universal desire to give your child everything that they need. And I think we as parents will go to great lengths to do that. And that's the reason why, even in the midst of all of that insecurity around housing and food, I woke up every day and I was like, I have to get this degree. This is really important for me to do because I looked at my daughter and she needed that. She needed me to be able to earn that credential so that I could provide for her. So I think there are parents across this country who are making incredible sacrifices for their children, working 3 and 4 jobs, maybe working in professions they wouldn't want to work in, otherwise, to be able to put food on the table for their children. And at Generation Hope in our organization, that's what we see every day with our scholars. They are just so driven and motivated to get their degree because they want to give their children the world. And so this is a highly motivated group of students that's under supported.
And I want to bring in Joseph Yusef to this conversation. He's a graduate of Howard University. He earned his degree while parenting his 9-year-old daughter. And I know, Nicole, you've worked with Joseph. Good morning, Joseph, and welcome.
Good morning, ladies.
Hi, Joseph.
Congratulations on graduating from Howard University, prestigious, historically Black university, with your degree in journalism and film. And now you're working for Howard University. So not only are you a graduate, you're also their full-time employment with the college. How are things going, Joseph?
Things are going. That's the best way to say it, man. Especially being at a HBCU, the difficulties that we face behind closed doors. It's just going. I'm grateful for the opportunity.
We know Black colleges have been under assault lately. Unfortunately, they've been the target of bomb threats and other kinds of vicious attacks. But what was it like for you, Joseph? We've heard Nicole's story as a Black woman being a parent on a campus. We don't hear a lot about Black dads. So that's what caught my attention in reading this story. Talk about underrepresented. I don't know if I've read any stories about the struggles of Black dads on campuses, or even a study that says there are Black dads on college campuses.
Indeed. So first, I def have to say I appreciate you for even acknowledging that, because nowadays, especially in America, we don't acknowledge the progress and work that Black fathers do. So to elaborate back to your question, my experience. So my experience initially began, my sophomore or junior year in high school. Family was family. I feel like that. If you're Black, you understand that comment. Family is family.
I got you.
And for me, I didn't have a father figure around. And so that led me to do other things and in search of, a father figure. The friends that I had at the time, they were friends, but I was just yearning for something much more. And at the time, I was in high school, and it's crazy to have this thought, but I literally asked myself one day, like, if I were to die right now, what would I have left behind? And at that time, I had nothing left behind. And so at a young age, for me, I was like, I can't leave this earth not having anything left behind. So at a young age, I was like, yeah, I think I'll be a parent intentionally. And the person I was dating at the time, she was going through her issues. And as a person who's empathetic and caring and wears the cape of Superman, I was like, if I can help myself and also help you, why not? So, we were in love, had that process of being in love and, making a child. My experience as a father in the beginning was not great. I can be brutally honest and say I did fit these stereotypical norms of, no good parent choosing everything over his child and all those other harsh things. But, after, the fussing and fighting of, having different minds and just having different intentions, time changed. Initially I didn't see college as an option because I was just like, as a producer, I'll be great. My music's going to be fire. Man, you can't tell me nothing. I'll be stubborn. And, obviously, the reality of it, I'm still here, still making beats, but that didn't provide me the comfort that I needed. And so, after being involved with, a few other programs before Generation Hope, I'll never forget, there was what's the name of it? There was like I can't remember the name of it. It was basically one of those college events. I can't remember the name of it, but it's like when all colleges come together and then present what they have. And it was one of those situations at this nonprofit, LAYC. And I'll never forget, Caroline was there representing Generation Hope. And it's like, hey, we take applications. And keep in mind, before I knew she was going to be there, but, I just had to, prepare myself to meet her and all that. And I'll never forget, I gave her my application. And then, weeks and months later, I'll never forget, I got that phone call saying, hey, you're accepted. And from there, my life changed. I think if it wasn't for, the people of Generation Hope and the people of LAYC at the time, I tell people this all the time, if it wasn't for them, I guarantee you, I wouldn't be here. But when I mean by I wouldn't be here, I wouldn't be alive. Because the decisions, that mindset of what I was doing and what I was intended to do, it wasn't this path. It wasn't the path of being able to have these opportunities and speak to people and, share my story.
Let me stop you for a minute, Joseph. I want to ask Nicole,
that.
how common, Joseph has told like the most powerful, gut-wrenching story about even thinking about not being here physically and literally not being here, having a baby because it was going to be his only way to make a mark on the world. Thinking that as a teenager, is that a common story that you hear at Generation Hope?
I think it's definitely a common story. And I want to just mention that Joseph is one of the incredible scholars that I included in my book, Pregnant Girl. And it was really important for me to include the teen fatherhood perspective. And so you just have a taste of Joseph's story, but it's really an incredible story. And he's such a strong young man and student, and we're honored to have been on his college journey with him. But yes, I think that's a big theme. And honestly, it's one of the reasons that I named the organization Generation Hope, because I don't think that people have a real grasp of the hopelessness that many young people, particularly Black, Indigenous, Latinx young people are feeling across this country about their future. And that is something that we really need to be talking more about because it does connect to all of these other issues. So unfortunately, I would say yes. I think when students have the opportunity to go to college, as Joseph just said, then we start to see where that can turn around and that can really change. But there is a sense of hopelessness that we definitely see in many young parents, but I think in youth in general.
Wow. So Joseph, you're now, you connect with Generation Hope, you get accepted, you're at Howard University. Did you tell anyone on campus that you were a father?
Some people, yes. Other people, no. My exposure to Howard, I didn't, how can I say this? Initially coming to that campus, I was like, it's all about parties. It's all about being that person. It's all about, having the it factor. And I never once considered, in the beginning to be like, what would it be like for me and my daughter? Because I was just like, I already know what I'm going into. Like, it's just a different mindset. Not saying it's bad or good, but it's a different mindset. And so, there were some professors where I knew the workload would be a bit tough. And for those professors, I was like, hey, can we just have a conversation? Just, let it be known that I am a parent. But at the same time, I'm not making any excuses for why I can't do your work. But in the event that there is a pushback or delay, or if you see the potential drop out of nowhere, just understand other obligations are taking care of my life. And, for the professors that understood, chances are I'm still talking to those professors to this day. And then for those professors who didn't, I understand. As a professor, I get it. You have your mission and your goal, but as a student parent, I have my mission and my goals. And so,
Did you see, I want to ask you about the resources. Did you see more resources being directed towards mothers than fathers on that campus?
I didn't see resources at all.
Okay.
Not that I know of. And I'm not saying Howard didn't have anything presented, but as a parent coming to that campus, I had no clue at all. Like, it even took me a while to identify the mental health resources they had. Like, I knew about that before I knew about any resources that they have for parents.
Okay. What about, Nicole, the colleges that you work with, and in your own experience, did you see more resources available for mothers versus fathers?
So what I will say is, I think across higher ed, so at Generation Hope, we provide direct support to students who are attending 20 different 2- and 4-year schools across the region, but we also work with colleges across the country to help them transform their campuses to better serve student parents. Across higher ed, there is a lack of support for student mothers and fathers. There's a lack of awareness that this population even exists. And so that's kind of the big headline. I think when there are programs, some of them tend to be specifically focused on mothers, or they're structured in a way or messaged in a way that is much more kind of targeted to mothers rather than fathers. What we've seen at Generation Hope, we've always served both mothers and fathers. What is really important is that you're intentional about your outreach to both mothers and fathers. Sometimes it needs to look different. Sometimes you need different ambassadors. Sometimes you need to meet them where they are. We have a whole recruitment effort for teen fathers where we're going to barbershops, for example. And so really, we want to see programming that is inclusive. We want to see programming that's creative, and that's really thinking about the unique needs of both mothers and fathers and incorporating that. But there is a dearth of programming for student parents in general, and then definitely a dearth of programming when it comes to fathers.
Joseph, having now yourself been through this experience, now being a part of the administration at a college like Howard, what do you think colleges can do to address this dearth of services for parenting students, particularly as it relates to Black fathers?
For Black fathers, inclusion. Like, on that campus, it's crazy. Historically Black colleges, you think about Howard, not once did I see an image of myself. And what do I mean by image of myself? Not once did I ever see a Black father being highlighted with their child. I always seen, mothers, and that's, once again, shouts out to the mothers. We love you forever and always. We can't do this without you. I mean that. But once again, fathers, we just don't get that acknowledgement or that visibility. So college campuses can definitely step that up and include us in our images. Like, don't just have, like, if there's a family, if that man has a family, please include that whole family. When it comes to resources, there's some that I would love to work on. And by all means, please allow me to do so. But I would love to set up like a care package for all incoming students, not incoming students, but all incoming student parents. It doesn't just have to be fathers. This is where, inclusion matters. But, for fathers or mothers, when it comes to these, campuses, have maybe 5,000 to 10,000 per semester or for the whole year where they can pull and take for resources, childcare, car costs, like maintenance, all those other things. Those are the things I think would be very beneficial to, eliminate the gap of communications of, student parent with the facility and vice versa.
Excellent suggestions. Last question for you, Nicole. How do you think this report from Temple University on the status of Black fathers can elevate this conversation so we can start to see more resources for the things that Joseph talked about, as well as those things that Ali talked about earlier?
One of the things I think this report does is it puts data around the stories. And, organizations like Generation Hope that have been doing this work with fathers for a long time, none of this information, none of the data, none of the findings in the Hope Center's report are surprising. We have been, pushing for more resources and support for student parents, including student fathers. But what people respond to is data. They need to hear the stories like Joseph's, and Joseph has, that's a powerful story. But what moves the needle in terms of them actually making investments and starting to prioritize this work is the data. And so I think what the Hope Center has done is really given us the data to bring together with incredible stories like Joseph's to say to people working across higher ed, policymakers, various, advocates and activists to say, this is why this is important. This is why student parent work is important, but this is why we also need to be talking about Black fathers within this work. We now have the data to do that.
Yeah. Last question for you, Joseph. How is your daughter, and is she on track to be a Howard University student?
An amazing question. My daughter's doing phenomenal. Currently in school. Is she on track to pursue Howard? Based on our last conversation, yes. You can ask her to this very day. She still says, "Daddy, I want to go to Howard." I'm like, all right, we'll see. A couple years from now, we'll see if that changes. But either way, I'm supporting the fact that she wants
in her mindset and yours, just by you being a Howard graduate. They always say, if you can see it, you can be it, right? So she can see dad as a Howard graduate. And so she knows that she too can be a Howard graduate. Such an amazing story. It is International Women's Day, but Joseph, you're getting the gold star for the best story of the day. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I just love to hear stories with good endings like that. Thank you, Nicole, doing phenomenal work. Again, your new book is out, Pregnant Girl, A Story of Teen Motherhood, College, and Creating a Better Future for Young Families. Generation Hope, we're going to put your website up so folks can go and find out more about you, donate, support the work that you're doing so you can keep telling these stories and keep helping students like Joseph. There's so much potential out there. People just need to find folks like you, and it can change literally their entire lives. So thanks to both of you again. All right, my next guest is Kenneth Braswell. He is the CEO of Fathers Incorporated, and he's also an author of multiple children's books, including Daddies, There's Noise Outside. Good morning and welcome back to the special report, Kenneth. I know you were listening to Joseph's story. How common is that story with the Black dads that you work with at your organization?
Man, this conversation is so phenomenal. I kudos to you. Thank you so much. You are speaking my heart, and you are speaking my truth.
This is just reading the Washington Post. I find this article, these stories sometimes get buried, and you got to look closely to find stories like this one.
Absolutely. But for Joseph, in my circle and in the space that I work in, I hear those stories over and over and over and over again. The task is trying to do what Nicole suggested, and that is, how do we empower each other, right? Black moms and Black dads without sacrificing one another, right? And so I love the way I'm listening to Nicole, because I have that ear when I hear people talking about parents to see whether or not even in their dialogue, they're going to be inclusive of both dads and moms. And both Ali and Nicole just was even across the board. They were focused on what they were doing, but purely acknowledged that there's a need to recognize fathers in this conversation, because we can't raise our children alone. And we have to recognize that we all face hardships, but we have one goal in common, and that is the health and well-being of our children.
Yeah, Joseph made an excellent point where he talked about imaging and the fact that he never saw anyone on Howard's campus that looked like him, a Black man with a child. And there's so many common myths about Black fathers. Help us debunk some of those most common, particularly those negative myths that people have around Black dads. Yeah,
I think the biggest one is this notion that we're absent. I always tell people with our dads, we have like these 5 common themes, conversational themes. And one of the conversational themes is, for every single mom, there is a single dad. For every single mom, there is a single dad. The term single mom doesn't denote marital parenting status. It denotes marital status. So if you're talking about single people, you got both.
Right.
It's just in a way that we literally use those terms and talk about those terms. So I think we have to be more intentional on how we use terms and how we project our families. I had a young lady some years ago. Wow, she was angry at the father of her child, and she just venomous. And then she kept going, "Oh, these men ain't this, and these men ain't that, and these men ain't this." And I said, "Even your dad?" And she goes, "No." And I said, "Even your son?" And she goes, "No." I said, "Even your brothers?" I said, "So who are you talking about?" Right? And so let's be clear where our pain points are, right? And not to hurt people. That's what they say, right? And so when you hurt, you lash out. And we really have to find a way to love on each other. I love what Joseph did when you asked him about his story. And he says he recognizes today. I didn't even know today was International Women's Day. Shout out to all the ladies out there on this day. And you gave him his kudos, but he gave homage first before he took his own. And I think that's so necessary in our space, that we project what we need, but we give homage to each other, because our children don't come to this earth alone. They come to whatever the circumstance is. At least two people found a way to like each other for a couple of minutes at least, right? Right. And so we have to recognize that it takes the two of us to walk through our pain points to get to the other end. You asked Joseph a question, and he was talking about what was his motivation for really kind of staying in there. And I kind of wrote a piece of note on my paper, and I wrote, "You have to love your children more than you hate fill in the blank." Right? You have to love your children more than you hate the mother of your child. You have to love your children more than you hate child support. You have to love your children more than you hate the police. You have to love yourself more than you hate fill in the blanks, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about how much you love your children, not how much you love those other things. And what I love about Joseph's story is, regardless of his journey in his life, like most of us go through, he was prepared when the opportunity presented itself.
Yeah. And he just showed, Kenneth, that when you give people like Joseph an opportunity to choose something over, the streets, the hood, or whatever it is they've been accustomed to, many will take advantage of it. He could have been a statistic stuck in whatever neighborhood he was in, maybe killed himself, maybe killed somebody else. I mean, he was on a path that probably wasn't going to end well. But Generation Hope was there to give him hope and put him on a different path. I wonder, Kenneth, I read this statistic also as I'm reading about Joseph's story, another story in the CNN that said America's disdain for Black men and boys hasn't diminished. Disdain hasn't diminished in the years since Trayvon Martin was killed. And we know that was a decade ago, 10 years ago. How is it that Black men like Joseph are just stepping up and overcoming these barriers when they continue to face such structural and institutional racism and literally, this article said, dehumanization, the othering of Black men?
Yeah, there is something interestingly to note when we talk about Trayvon Martin and what Trayvon Martin, what his unfortunate death sparked for our community. I never talk about Trayvon Martin without bringing to light Emmett Till. Trayvon was just a continuation of what we did not deal with Emmett Till's death, right? And so if you remember the time, President Obama was the president. He was having a lot of conversation about fatherhood. I know it because I was working with the White House at the time, and we were enjoying this space where, my goodness, we got a Black man in the White House, and he's talking about Black fathers, and he's talking about that Black dads. And not only is he doing that, he's doing that at Morehouse, right? Remember that? He came to Morehouse, and people were upset with him because they said he was chastising Black fathers, but he was loving on them at the same time. And we had this trajectory that we were going through, which I thought was where we needed to be. And unfortunately, Trayvon Martin happened. And he comes back to the podium the next day, and his statement is, "That could have been my son." and all focus moved from dad to son. It moved from men to boys. And when it shifted, all the work and all the focus moved to mentorship programs. And no one was talking about dads anymore, right? And then the impact of talking so much about boys sparked Black Girls Rock, right? And so then we started talking about boys and girls, and we never came back to talking about men. And that is why the disdain has not diminished since Trayvon Martin. And I would submit that it has disdain, is disdain since Emmett Till and even before him, right? That we've never gotten this place where the conversation around the importance of Black fathers has been done in a sustainable way. And I believe, like Nicole believes, the way you do that is you connect the two conversations, Black men and Black women, Black mothers and Black dads, and you move them in the same direction at the same pace. So each conversation strengthens each other, not diminishes each other. And I think, Areva, that this conversation that we're having today, what you are doing today is the template for what has to happen for our community, that both men and women got to come together, recognize what it is we're fighting for, talk about them equally, and hold each other arm in arm and fight this thing out together, because we're the only ones that can solve the issues for our children in our communities.
What you just said was so powerful, and I didn't know it, and I'm certain that a lot of my viewers didn't, that the conversation was taking place. I do remember that with President Obama and his focus on fathers, but that whole conversation and the work, because it wasn't just a conversation, it was the movement, it was the work, and I assume the finances and the resources shifted after Trayvon Martin was murdered to, as you said, boys and then girls, and then left that void for more work and sustained work around fatherhood. One thing that Nicole said too that I found interesting was this continued stigma around teen moms. Is that still the case as you see with teen dads, Black dads? Is there a stigma? Because the stigma, has been different, right? Because for men, depending on who you talk to, it could be a badge of honor that you are a father, that you have multiple children, right? Whereas women, the stigma has always been a pejorative one, or a negative, that you are loose, that you're promiscuous, that you are whole, or whatever that term may be. So where are people thinking? How are people thinking about teen Black dads?
It's interesting, because when she was talking about and having that conversation, I thought about my mom, who became pregnant with me when she was 18 years old. She was in North Carolina. And she literally had to leave North Carolina to go to New York because of the stigmatism of her being pregnant with me. And it brought me all the way back to that. And then I remember when my wife now, my girlfriend then, when she became pregnant with our son, and we were in our church, and I can remember how the church turned on us. Right? Literally, like, because we weren't married, they turned on us. And I thought, wow, are you serious? 2008, this is what we doing? We turning on our community because of this notion that you got to be married before you have children, when most of y'all who mad at us wasn't married when y'all had y'all. But that's a whole nother story, right? We had that
that's a whole Black pastor story. We don't have time for it today, but okay.
Right? But when you start looking at programming and you start looking at what's going on in our community, I think we do much more celebrating of life than we do diminishing both moms and dads. I think our biggest issue when it comes to moms and dads today is like the old saints did to say, don't bring no babies to this house. I ain't taking care of no babies, right? And so it's kind of like their way of saying, if you can't take care of them, don't have them. However, as a grandparent myself, I know when the baby shows up and takes the first breath, all that stuff is out the door. You talk
all of that's gone. It's just love, love, love. But you do feel like dads. I'm still trying to understand, what are you saying about the stigma, if any, that attaches to Black men who are having babies? You talked about your experience in the church, very common, I would imagine, for a lot of Black fathers and mothers.
Right.
Where are we with Black dads? Or are we
I think
embracing them or running away from them?
Yeah, so I think that they are embracing it, that they are turning in, not turning out. I think for the most part, they've always turned in. I think the question, right, when any man for that matter, but since we're talking about Black dads, the first question that rises for them was the first question that rose for me when my wife told me she was pregnant, which was, how am I going to take care of this child? Right. And the answer to that question either gives you confidence to move forward or it scares the hell out of you. Right. And then you start looking around your intimate circle to see where your support mechanisms are. And then you look at those support mechanisms through the lens of your own parenting and your own environment. So if you've been parented through a dysfunctional lens and your community is parenting through a dysfunctional lens, you don't have all of the confidence in yourself to do that. And the minute you run into a problem, we flee, right? The minute we run into a problem, we flee. And the societal narrative, to a certain extent, supports the fleeing because it fills in the ongoing conversation that Black fathers don't take care of their kids anyway. Right. And so our mindset is, if you're going to say it about me, I might as well be it. Right. We don't flip the narrative and say, no, you had a child, we're here to support you. Nah, we would have liked that you gotten married and all, got a house and a picket fence and a little dog and all that other stuff. But since the baby is here, let's figure that out. And then I'll tell you this last story. It also takes me back to my grandmother, who my mother has no knowledge of her history, because my grandmother and her sister was left on the doorstep of my great uncle and aunt in North Carolina because something happened to the family, right? And so they took them in. And so when I went to do my genealogy on the family, what I found was, in the first census, they were listed as boarders. In the second census, in the 30 census, they were listed as adopted, right? And so somewhere along the line, this village that we talk about wrapped their hands around these two girls and brought them legally into our family. And I don't know if that's what we do today, but I do think on a spiritual level and an emotional level, that when children are born in our own comfort zones, our own personal spheres, that somehow we all wrap a hand around them. Now, the question is, at what point do we release them and we remove our hands from around them? And I think that that happens much more quickly for boys than it does for girls. Mm-hmm. At somewhere along the line, our cute little boys, our mama's boys, our whatever we want to call our little boys, turn into, oh, that trifling, blah, blah, blah. Right. And the question is, wait a minute, how did that cute little boy turn into that trifling? What happened? What transpired that this is the way you see him now? And this is the way you're going to see him for the rest of his life until he proves he's not. Yeah. Right. And that is adhering to the responsibilities that he creates for himself. And one of those responsibilities is having children.
Well, I think we can't say enough, as you just said, about the myth that Black fathers are absent, because I remember when you were here before, we talked about that study that came out that showed that Black fathers are indeed more involved in some of the basic household things like bathing and homework than other fathers. But that narrative is rarely told. We don't hear that narrative. We hear that the narrative of Black fathers being absent, of Black fathers not taking care of their responsibilities. Just quickly, Kenneth, what can we do to provide more support for those Black fathers who are trying to get their degrees? Because we know college for everybody in this country is the ticket to higher wages. It's it puts you on a different trajectory than people who just have a high school diploma or a GED. Not the ticket to all things great. And we know there are lots of issues, college loan debt, etc. And Black folks still aren't achieving what white folks are with the same college degree, if not more education. But it is something to get you a leg up. So how can we support those Black dads who are trying to get that leg up?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have to do is listen, right? We have to listen more to them. Like, we sat here today very intentionally and we listened to Joseph's story. right? We listen to him tell his story. We listen to the passion of his story. We listen to the struggle within his story. We connected with his story. We understood his story, and his story became a personal story that we'll probably tell to other people, you know, as we meet other people in our lives. So I think listening is the number one thing we have to do. The second thing we have to realize, particularly for those of us who have programs, and that is, while curriculum and education matters, needs matter more, right? And Nicole talked about the things that she had to do in pursuit of her education, but there were times where needs pressed the door much harder than her need to get educated and for curriculum. And so for our fathers, if you're going to serve them, if you're going to help them, you have to take into consideration that bringing them into your space to do a 10-week curriculum over 20 hours is not going to be all they need when they're struggling with finding a job, paying rent, paying child support, which is another interesting thing that I also heard Ali talk about, and I think I heard Nicole talk about it as well, of the fathers that are coming into our program in Atlanta now. The number one need is legitimation, which is attached to custody of their children. The second need is child support. And the number 3 need of our fathers today is housing above employment. Employment has always been number 1 for providing father services. And for some reason right now, these fathers are desperately in need of stabilizing their housing situation. And we have to figure that out.
Wow, great information. Thank you. Always a pleasure to see you, Kenneth. Again, go to his website, check it out. He's written multiple books that focus on children and the experiences that children have. And we can't talk about supporting Black fathers and mothers without talking about our children. And thank you for writing these books and giving parents an opportunity to share these books with their children and all the great work you're doing. We got to keep lifting up these dads, and on International Women's Day, of course, moms as well.
Absolutely.
Good to see you, my friend.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
All right. I want to thank all of my guests today for joining me. And thanks to my experts and to my parents, to Joseph and Nicole for sharing their stories of being teens and being young adults who were in college pursuing their degrees while also raising their children. So happy to hear Joseph's daughter talking about already going to Howard University or just going to college, period, because of Joseph's willingness to accept the help from Generation Hope. He now has changed the trajectory of his life, but also the life of his daughter and any future children that he may have as well. Really appreciate the work that Nicole and Kenneth are doing. Those programs matter. Programs like that in communities across this country are making a difference. They need more funding. They need more support. They need more volunteers, because when they do their work, when they connect with folks like Joseph, we know they can literally change lives. All right, it's International Women's Day, so my words to live by have to do with women. And I want to say to all the women out there, you are beautiful, you are brave, you are smart, funny, lovable, and so much more. You are enough, and you always will be. All right, enjoy your International Women's Day. Be safe out there. Wear your mask, maybe, depending on your state. And remember, we are all in this together.